hello everyone, and welcome to the finale for the 17th Fluent in 3 Months Challenge. As a part of the finale, we are going to answer some questions from our finalists, as well as questions in the chat if we have time to get to them. And we are also going to select the winners for our challenge. But before we get started, I want to make sure we take a moment to give both our panelists and our finalists the opportunity to introduce themselves. So today, our polyglot panel includes Simon Ager. Simon, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Simon. I live in Wales in the UK, and I run omniglot.com, the online encyclopedia of writing systems and languages. And I speak a few languages as well.
And you're a musician.
Well, yeah, yeah.
Excellent. All right, Benny.
My sound there. I actually met Simon for the first time when I was in the Gaeltacht, which I have just come from. And you guys know me, of course, as the founder of Fluent in 3 Months. And I am the one who kicked this whole thing off and inherited the challenge as it was from Brian Kwong. And I'm talking to you guys today from an airport in Dublin after having my own language immersion experience. So that's me.
And I'm Shannon Kennedy, the head coach of the Fluent in 3 Months Challenge. So let's get into introducing each of our finalists. I'm going to go through in the order that I see you. So share what language you learned and what you got out of the challenge. So Sophia, you're up first.
All right. Hello. I'm Sophia. I studied Japanese for the challenge, and I was living in Japan for the duration of the challenge. I think the two biggest things that I took out of it were, one, that I am capable of doing this, of learning another language, and two, that I fully enjoy learning another language. So I gained a new hobby out of it, and then I grew so much in my language journey to the point where, I put off learning Japanese for about the first year that I was there, which I'm still a little bit mad at myself about that. But by the end, I was going out of my way to use it wherever I could. And sorry for the truck, but go out of my way to use it whenever I could and make the best of the situation that I was in. So definitely grew a lot, I think.
Thank you. All right, Alicia.
Hi, my name is Alicia Galpin. I live in Chamonix, France, and I studied French as part of the challenge. And I would say the biggest thing I got out of this challenge was the sense of community. It's so great to have people who understand when you forget a simple word in French like bateau, which I honestly knew before I could even speak French. But equally, the same group of people is there for you when you finally use the subjunctive correctly in a conversation with a friend. And to have people really empathize and understand the journey was an amazing experience for me.
Great, thank you. And Tom?
Hi, I'm Tom. I also learnt Japanese for the challenge with Sophia. The biggest thing that I got out of the challenge was doing the challenge. Again, it's the community. I've always really enjoyed learning languages, but it's been quite a solitary thing, whereas being amongst other people who have the same interest is amazing. It spurred me on, and I've made more progress in Japanese than any other language I've learned. And I think that's just being around other people who also like to geek out about languages.
Excellent. Well, thank you all for being here, and thank you to our panelists as well. So we're going to go ahead and jump into the Q&A portion of the call. So Sophia, Alicia, Tom, if you have any questions for our panelists, feel free to jump in.
Sure, I'll ask one. So even being back in the US for a month, I've started to realize how lucky I was and how easy I had it, because I was being surrounded by Japanese every day, that I feel like I was able to grow a little bit quicker than I am now that I'm back in Minnesota, where there aren't hardly any people who speak the language. So I guess I'm wondering, what's the best way to maintain that growth and immerse myself in the language when it's such a big shift from being surrounded by it all the time and having endless access to the language and with people who I can practice it with, to coming back to not having that at all?
Simon, I'd love to hear your take on this first. How do you immerse yourself in languages when you're away from those experiences living them?
Well, I try to find things that interest me, with videos, films, podcasts, TV shows, whatever, and books as well, audiobooks, written books, whatever. Any material I can find in the language that I can enjoy and learn from at the same time. And I find recently I've been watching a lot of videos on YouTube, on TikTok, and there's a lot of good language stuff on TikTok, in fact. I don't know about Japanese. I am learning Japanese at the moment, as well as Spanish. And I found lots of good stuff on YouTube. There's all sorts of stuff. I like listening to Japanese bands. I found Wagaki Band recently. They're a lot of fun. And I try to learn songs. So, I look for things that I enjoy and make the most of them. I don't actually talk to many people. That's something I need to find ways to do. But actually, things to input, I can find plenty of.
Yeah,
Okay,
I'd be the same as Simon, that try to find content to absorb in the language. And one thing I'm doing as I am coming back from Ireland now, and I'm going to be in Texas, where obviously there's not going to be people speaking Irish around me. Like Simon said, resources along the lines of TikTok. One thing I've done with TikTok is I've created a different account. So I'd recommend you make a brand new account and then search for hashtags in Japanese, and just keep watching those, and then keep marking not interested for things that are just kind of silly pranks or whatever that you don't care about, and things that are really kind of showcasing the language. And eventually the algorithm learns to only show you videos in Japanese. And this works so well that even for a language as small as Irish, I have catered my account that it will only show me content in the Irish language. So that's one thing. The other thing I'm going to be doing is not just input, because input is very effective to make sure it's being active in your brain, but you want to be making sure you're getting output. So obviously getting lessons with a teacher as often as you can. I always hope that people would try to do that. And another thing, again, back to the social media likes of YouTube and TikTok, is maybe upload your own stuff. And this is my own challenge to myself, that I'm also going to try to upload content in Irish to these same accounts. And in doing so, I'm going to have to do a lot of homework between each video. Like if I want to do a tongue twister video, I'm going to have to research that and everything. And it really keeps me active in using that language. So both the input and the output as much as possible. And you can create a virtual immersion environment that can make a world of difference.
awesome advice. Thank you.
All right, Tom, you have a question?
Yeah, gutted that I might have to join TikTok, but I was wondering about kind of long-term language learning in terms of, do you guys ever think it's important to take a break from language learning, or do you just keep going from one to the next? And I'm just thinking about sort of long-term burnout, because I'm always quite excited and wanting to learning, but I didn't know whether you thought it was best to kind of put off the gas every now and then.
Simon, what do you think when it comes to taking breaks from language learning?
Well, in the past, I've kind of learned a bit of a language, then taken a long break, and then gone back and did more rather than another language. But the past 4.5 years, I've been learning every single day. I got up to 1,500 days on Duolingo yesterday. And that's not all the same language. I've learned a lot of different languages on there. And as I said, I'm doing Japanese and Spanish at the moment, but I'm doing other languages and other apps as well. And I think once you get into that kind of, it can in some ways it can be a trap, because you want to maintain your streak on Duolingo or whatever, if that's important to you, and it is at the moment for me. But for other things, yeah, it can be good to take a break at times. And it may be you take a break from your main language. So you're doing Japanese, Thomas. Maybe you do something a bit easier, because Japanese is quite challenging. You know, if there's another language you've been thinking about doing and you think, oh, I'd like to do a bit of Italian now. I could do a bit of that. And that gives you a break from the Japanese, but you're still learning. Or, you know, if you wanted to take a complete break from language learning, there's nothing wrong with that. And it actually, your brain is still working on it, even when you're not actively studying. It's all trying to process everything you've taken in. And it takes time to do that. So it does make sense to take breaks now and then. And if you feel that your motivation is lagging, then yes, taking a break is one option, or finding other ways to spark your interest in what you're learning.
Yeah, I would definitely echo that sometimes it's not necessarily about taking that break, that it may be about that you've reached a plateau and you're not making a lot of progress right now because you need to mix things up. You need to do something very different. The level of intensity you've had in recent months doesn't mean you need to necessarily take a break from Japanese. Maybe you need to take a break from this approach that you have been using, even though it's been effective for you, and doing something a little bit lighter. Maybe just reading, or watching more Japanese TV and not necessarily speaking as much for a few months, or really focusing on vocabulary for a few months. That's another thing you could do. But in general, with language learning, I am in a certain state of switching between three modes. I'm either in intensive language learning mode for one language, and that's my typical Fluent in 3 months projects. So I'm either just doing that and my other languages go to the side, or I'm in maintenance mode where I am doing kind of like what Simon said. I'm just trying to keep my my trends up and not lose any consistency in using my flashcard app, and to use all of my languages as well as I can in a balanced way, accepting that I'm not necessarily pushing any of the languages up a huge amount, but I'm still getting practice. And then the third one is what your question kind of refers to in the break. And I think you know yourself if you need that. And for me personally, I went through very, very difficult years about 2 years ago. And I just had to accept, you know what? I'm not going to learn I'm not just going to learn a new language. I'm not going to be able to maintain my languages for this year because I need a mental health break. So sometimes when you're completely worn out, you do need a mental health break. But that's a different feeling than just kind of reaching a plateau and feeling like you're not making progress in the language. So it's important to kind of gauge, where am I right now? Am I just feeling like, maybe you just need a weekend off, and that's fine. That's not really a big pause. That's just catching your breath. But maybe you're just at a plateau and you need to mix up your language learning. But if you're feeling completely drained and exhausted, then maybe you do need a mental health break and take time away from language learning. Not too much time, just a couple of months, unless you're really, really worn out, and then come back to it feeling refreshed.
I'm going to add something to this here because, like you, Benny, I had to take a break a little while ago. And I think one of the things that scares us most about the break is not just, losing the consistency that we've built up, but also having to jump back into it and like re-establishing that habit, because, creating habits is not necessarily easy. And one of my tendencies personally, I don't know if Benny or Simon, either of you do this too, is once I take a break, when I'm ready to start back up, I try to start back up exactly how I left my habit off, which is usually too much. And so once you do take your break, when you do get back into it, don't try and do everything that you were doing before the break, because it's going to be really discouraging for you. You want to systematically and like kind of step by step add it back in. So start with something small, like Simon said, and do like Duolingo every single day. And once you've established that as something that you're able to maintain consistently, then what you want to do is add the next thing. So like a next smaller thing, or maybe at that point you're like, okay, I'm ready to start taking weekly lessons again, or I'm ready to start, picking up my course book a little bit. And so just step by step, get back into the habit. Don't try to say, okay, when I stopped studying Japanese, I was taking weekly lessons. I was doing Duolingo every day. I was doing a chapter out of my course book every day. I was also reading and link every day. So I'm going to do all of those things the first day that I pick the habit back up. It's not going to work for you. So just something to be aware of once you do take your break. One, so that you're not so scared or intimidated by picking the habit back up, because when that happens, what we do is we kind of procrastinate starting again. And so finding something small, quick, easy that you can win with to reestablish that habit is going to make the break seem a lot less scary, because you're not so worried about how you're going to get back into the habit.
That's brilliant.
All right.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Alicia, you have a question.
Yes, my question is, how do you balance more than one language? And for example, I spoke Spanish fairly well before I moved to France. And then I was getting confused. I'd throw in Spanish words when I'd be trying to speak a French sentence. So I took a big break from Spanish to focus on French. Since this challenge ended, I've been going back to Spanish. I'm not really learning anything new, but I'm remembering a lot. And I guess my question is, how do you maintain, as Benny said, in the maintenance phase, what does the routine look like when you're trying to keep all the different plates spinning at one time between different languages?
I'm definitely curious to hear what Simon has to say about this, because as you guys know, in Omniglot, he covers so many different languages, and I've personally experienced him speaking a language like Irish. So I'm very curious, Simon, how do you keep all those plates spinning at once?
With difficulty. At the moment, I'm actively studying Spanish, Japanese, Dutch, Danish, and Swedish, and studying every day. For some of them, I'm focusing more on Spanish and Japanese. I do lots of lessons in those. The others, it's just a few lessons a day, just to keep up the momentum, to maintain them, I suppose. And I have a Dutch friend who I'm helping with her Welsh. So she writes to me in Welsh and I write to her in Dutch. Well, a mixture of the two. And with other languages, I go to a French conversation group every week. I have Welsh-speaking friends. I live in the Welsh-speaking part of Wales. Although over the past year and a half or so of lockdown, I haven't seen them so often, so I haven't actually spoken much Welsh. But I listen to the radio, I read books. I don't actively maintain all my languages at the same time, because it would just take me all day, and I have to work as well. But I try and do what I can, listening to stuff, reading stuff, watching videos, whatever I can find. And it depends how many languages you're trying to maintain as well.
Yes, not as many as you, but yeah, I'd like to maintain my French while remembering Spanish. And once I guess I'm comfortable with both of those, again, I'd like to go back to Italian, because I spoke Italian once too, which I've forgotten.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, yeah, it's, as I said before, finding content material that you enjoy, books or films or TV shows or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And doing a bit in Italian, a bit in Spanish, a bit in French, whenever you can.
Yeah, and what I would add to that is what kind of really worked for me when I was first getting into languages and first getting momentum in a few of the Romance languages was making sure that you've kind of to do two things. Firstly, you have to maintain those languages. You have to get them at the same level you left them off at, so that the quality of those languages is good. And that's doing all the stuff we've been talking about, is getting exposure to the language, maybe getting lessons in the language. But the second thing is trying to keep the languages separated in your head and trying to kind of become multilingual, as it were. And this is almost like a different skill. So what worked really effectively for me was my first true multilingual situation was when I was in Brazil, learning Portuguese, but also trying to maintain my Spanish and my French, especially. And so I would have days that were like in my week, I would have maybe 2 days a week for Portuguese, 2 days a week for Spanish, and then maybe another day for French. But I would also have, if I could, one day where my goal was to actually switch between the languages quickly. And my opportunity for that, obviously harder now during a pandemic, but my opportunity was there were social events with a lot of international people. So I would have the chance to actually like walk across the room and switch from French to Spanish. So that was something that I used. But in current situations, I would like on one day of the week, I would like schedule my Spanish lesson right after the French lesson. And it's going to be so hard. It's going to be brain melting. You're going to mix them up. You're going to put one word in where it shouldn't go, and your teacher will correct you. And that's great. And I needed that. I needed with my Portuguese to make mistakes. I needed to be just after speaking Spanish, walk up to a Brazilian and say, mais grande. And they'd be like, that doesn't exist in Portuguese. That sounds like Spanish. We say maior. And I'd have to be like, oh, okay, I'm so embarrassed because I made that mistake. But it would really burn into my brain. And that was very effective for me. So I would look at your calendar and just mark out, these are the days I'm going to be speaking French. These are the days I'm going to be speaking Spanish or using Spanish, getting exposure in some way. And then one day a week, I'm going to try and switch between the two of them. And that's going to be the hardest day, but it's also going to be the day that's going to make sure you're able to like compartmentalize them in your brain. And it's going to make it easier then when you move on to Italian, that they've really got these strong walls around them in your mind.
Okay, thank you.
Another thing I've heard some polyglots mention is that they kind of feel each language has its own personality, and they have a kind of different personality when they speak each language to some extent. So when you're speaking French, for example, exaggerate the Frenchness, the gestures, and everything. So it's less likely you use Spanish words or Italian words if you're kind of in a French persona. And similarly, when you're speaking Spanish, maybe adopt a more Spanish persona, and that might help. I don't know.
Oh, thank you.
And I know something that Shannon's a big fan of, that you're probably going to mention this, Shannon, but in this situation with French and Spanish, I would highly, highly recommend you get an assimil course in French about Spanish and actually try to learn your Spanish through French. And this will really show you what the differences are, and it'll really help you maintain your French while you're actually learning Spanish. So this process of laddering, I know Shannon's a huge fan of this, and it's something I would highly recommend, especially in your case, because the assimil books in French are especially good.
Okay, thank you.
He's calling me out on my assimil collection over here. Yeah, I think language laddering is a very effective tool. One other resource that I would recommend, given that you are a challenge community member, is the Polyglot Challenge. So we have that designed for you to be able to learn how to manage multiple languages. So that's an option for you now that you've completed a challenge. And other than that, like for me, at 15 languages at this point, I can't maintain everything. So what I do is I kind of prioritize. And what I do is I look at each language that I'm learning and I think about, okay, why am I learning this? What level is it at? What am I struggling with the most in these things? And kind of triage what I'm working on in each of the languages. So with just French and Italian, what I would look at is to say, okay, so like, what do I need to work on in French right now? Like, what stage am I at and what things am I struggling with? And kind of make a list and focus on those things. And then with Italian, do the same thing. So then I would be able to see, okay, well, right now my Italian needs more attention than my French. So I need to spend the majority of my study time working on Italian because this is what I'm struggling with the most and it's having the most interference from French. And I would focus on that. And then, every 2 weeks or so, I would kind of reevaluate and say, okay, where am I at now? And like, you may get to the point where you say, okay, my French is plateauing and I'm not making progress with some of the like fossilized errors and issues that I'm having in the language. So maybe even that means like kind of reversing, which is getting priority. And so constantly thinking about where you're at with each language and what needs attention so that way you're not sitting there spending 90% of your time studying Italian because it's new and you're newer and you're trying to pick it back up and you're at like a lower part and result of that, your French is suffering because it's not getting the attention that it needs. So kind of dividing the time based on what your needs are for each language. All right, Sophia, you have another question?
Yeah, I was wondering, when is a good time to throw another language into the mix? So I'm still kind of I'm still a beginner in Japanese, but Tom and I are doing the advanced challenge starting next week. So my goal for the end of the year is to reach at least like N4 A2 in Japanese. And after that, I would really, really love to start learning Korean. I'm very drawn to that language, so I don't know how much longer I can put it off, but I'm wondering if it's feasible to still be sort of a beginner in Japanese and then starting to be a beginner in Korean.
So, I mean, what do you think? When's a good time to decide, you can move on from the intensity of learning one particular new language?
Well, I think from your videos, you sounded pretty confident when you were speaking Japanese.
Thank you.
As far as I could tell. So I think you've got to the stage where you can have a comfortable conversation. It's not perfect. You've got a lot more to learn probably, but I think you're at a stage where you could consider adding another language. And as Korean has a lot in common with Japanese in terms of vocabulary borrowed from Chinese and the grammatical structures, then it's not like a completely different language. So it would be an interesting challenge to add, I think.
Yeah,
Good news. I can start it soon. Thank you.
Generally, my thinking on this is you're going to have the slightly extra challenge of those, like we were just talking about, dealing with multilingualism, the languages mixing between one another and it being harder to distinguish them in your mind if you're not yet at ideally a B2 level. But having said that, I've also absolutely learned languages to an A2 level and then moved on to another one. The catch is, when I have done that, the language I left at the A2 level, I feel like it has a much shorter half-life. So if I leave it for 3 months, it may go, or 6 months, let's say, if that's kind of your Korean, you're going to put 2022 into your Korean. Then after 6 months, it may drop from A2 to A1. You can reactivate that very quickly, of course. You can have another briefly intensive period and get that Japanese back up. But it's a lot harder to spin those plates. Whereas when I've got languages up to a B2 level, I can take much, much longer breaks. And the half-life there is greatly improved upon. So the language is only slightly worse when I come back to it. So it's why, if at all possible, I try to urge people to stick to one language till they get to a B2 level. But having said that, I have not done that myself all the time. I've absolutely stopped projects at A2 and gone on to the next one. The catch is, when I've done that, that A2 language generally does not end up on my permanent list because it gets degraded. And until I have another project where I return to it to really push it back up again, it's going to suffer in the short term. So, just keep that in mind with your Korean, that like after you switch over to Korean, you have to accept your Japanese will suffer potentially quite a lot depending on how much time you're putting into Korean. But then after that, you can have another intensive project with your Japanese. So, you could kind of push them up like this, like this, like this. But then if you can with your Korean, try to stick with that for as long as you can to get it into those B levels, because it'll make it so much easier to then start switching between them and keeping them both as actively useful languages in your mind.
Excellent.
That's assuming, that you will stop Japanese and start Korean rather than continuing Japanese and adding Korean. I don't know which you plan to do.
Well, I would like to keep them both up. So if I do pick up Korean, maybe doing like an 80-20 kind of thing, still putting some time into Japanese, because I would like to keep that up so that I'm able to speak with all my Japanese friends. But I am very impatient, so I would like to start Korean too.
Yeah, that could work, certainly.
Okay. Thank you so much.
One of the things that I do that I learned from Kirsten Cable of Fluent Language is what she calls just having contact languages. So when you go to learn a new language like Korean, rather than stopping Japanese entirely, you don't necessarily study it to learn anything new, but you spend time with it to maintain what you have. So that way, rather than stopping and losing maybe a little bit, if you did something daily, like for me, what this looks like is I either do like memorize every day or I read something on link every day. And I just do that. And it's enough to kind of maintain whatever language it is, where it's at, while I more aggressively study a new language. So it's more like 95-5. And the reason I do this is so that way, like Korean could get the bulk of my attention and I could really get it better faster because I'm spending so much time on it without losing any of my Japanese because I'm still kind of spending time with it and having contact with it, hence the contact language. And then once I get my Korean up to speed faster, it's sooner that I can start to balance the two a little bit more. And so that's the strategy that I use for doing something like that. So maybe that might work for you. All right, Tom, you had another question?
Yeah, recently I'm trying to kind of do more exposure in Japanese. So I'm trying to watch more Japanese dramas and listen to Japanese music. And at my current level, it has to come with English subs because otherwise it's not enjoyable. Do you think there's a benefit to that, or am I just kind of conning myself into thinking that it's helpful?
What would you say, Simon?
Well, I've certainly listened to a lot of material in languages I'm learning without understanding anything or very little. And I think there is benefit in it because you're absorbing aspects of the language, the pronunciation, the intonation. You'll pick up odd words at the beginning, and then gradually over time, as you learn more, you'll start to understand more. But it can be frustrating. If you got the subtitles, obviously you can understand what's going on. But maybe sometimes switch off the subtitles and see how much you understand. And then if it's really hard to follow what's going on without subtitles, maybe find something that's a bit easier. And there's some great stuff on YouTube. There's like the Easy Languages channel. Have you know about that? No, they go around interviewing people in the street, asking them kind of ordinary questions like, what's your favorite food? And they just talk in just everyday Japanese, and they have subtitles, but you can switch them off if you want. So that's a really nice way to get kind of relatively straightforward content.
Yeah, I definitely think that it's tempting to want to watch native-based media in the language as soon as possible. And when I'm learning European languages, my process is generally to just have the subtitles in that language. So if I'm learning Spanish, then subtitles in Spanish, because I can read them and understand more. Obviously, that's not so straightforward with a language like Japanese, where you're going to see a lot of kanji that you may not be familiar with. So like Simon said, if you find tools that they intentionally slow them down, because this is an issue with you're trying to improve your comprehension ability. And what I found, no matter what language it is, that if I'm using something like the Easy series or the Innovative Language podcast series, where they intentionally speak slower in the lower levels and then progressively increase the speed, I find that's a more useful use of my time to get me to that level where I'm finally able to consume naturally spoken media. Because otherwise you can turn on the news or you can turn on a TV show and it's just gobbledygook. And the English subtitles, the danger there is that I personally have never found that very helpful. I know for a lot of people it can be, and you are, like Simon said, getting exposure. You're hearing the language, it's kind of there, but generally my attention just goes to the English subtitles and I tune out the actual audio for the most part. So I personally would never watch a movie with English subtitles unless I just don't know the language and I'm just trying to enjoy the movie and I don't care about learning languages. So that's kind of what I would recommend is if you can. Then another thing is the likes of YouTube. If you watch stuff on YouTube, you can find native content and then change the speed to be 0.5. That can make a dramatic difference because sometimes the problem is they're speaking so quickly that your brain just can't process it. You can't think, well, what did they just say? The words are meshed together. But if they're speaking a little slower, then maybe you don't necessarily need the subtitles, and you can start to process in your mind, what is that word? And you can make it a truly learning experience where you pause it, you look something up. It doesn't have the same feel of just laying back and enjoying a Netflix show. And that's kind of why it's like, until you're at the stage where you can understand native speaking at their natural speed, you are not necessarily going to be able to have that lay back and enjoy a show on Netflix in Japanese. There's a process to get there, and that process includes material that's still maybe tailored to learners. But once you work through that, you can be at the stage then where you can enjoy that content. But personally, I wouldn't feel ready for it if I needed to use the English subtitles. That's just my particular learning style. Shannon, when you've been learning languages like Japanese and Chinese, how do you deal with consuming native content, and when you feel ready for it?
To be honest, I don't let myself feel guilty about the subtitles. I think that it's a really easy trap that we fall into, because there are resources out there that tell us you shouldn't be using subtitles. But for me, they've been a really great asset. And what I will do is, I think one of the other things that we're kind of afraid of is repetition. So we don't want to keep repeating the same song or the same TV episode or anything over. And actually, it's really beneficial to maybe watch the same episode in 3 times, and watch it once with English subtitles, watch it once with Japanese subtitles, and watch it again without any subtitles, and kind of check your comprehension each time. Same with songs, do the same thing. And I think that, just repetition is going to help you a ton, and help you step away more naturally from having to rely on subtitles or translations. And for me, one of the things that I do is also just kind of break things down further. So if I'm watching a TV episode, I may just, for the most part, be watching it, but then as it's progressing and I'm looking at the English subtitles, I'll realize, hey, learning how to say, oh, either way is fine for me is a useful phrase, and I want to know how to say that in Japanese. So I will rewind it and try and write it down. And I will literally rewind it. If it takes me 10 times to think I've got the phrase down right, I will do that. And so then by the end of the episode, I typically have maybe 10 to 12 phrases that are really what I think could be useful to me phrases. And what I'll do is I'll send those to my teacher, and I'll say, hey, I was watching this TV show and I heard these phrases. Are these correct? And then my teacher will go through those phrases and say, either correct them, or I actually did this with Croatian. And in the case of my Croatian teacher, I don't typically use bad language or cuss or anything like that. And my teacher knows this. So there were quite a few phrases that I had written down that were pretty vulgar that I didn't realize were. And so she would actually say, this is correct. You wrote that correctly, but you probably wouldn't say that. Here's a phrase that you would say that means the same thing. And so she would actually give me phrases that were even more useful for me in that way. And Japanese, it tends to be a bit of a gendered language. So the way that women speak can be quite different from the way that men speak. So maybe a female character said a phrase that you think would be really useful, and you send it to your teacher, and your teacher's like, it might sound a bit weird if you say that. So a guy would be more likely to say something like this. And so then you get phrases that it's okay. And that feedback makes all of this really memorable. And then the more things that you have like that, the more you start to understand and kind of step away from needing subtitles. All right. We're going to go ahead and end the Q&A portion of the call and step into the moment that you all have probably been eagerly awaiting. But before we get into announcing the winners, I want to ask both Simon and Benny to share any final words of encouragement that they have for you.
Simon?
Even if you feel like you're not making progress, you probably are. You just keep at it, and the more you learn, the more you'll understand, the more you'll enjoy it. There's more stuff you can access, literature, films, whatever. So that it takes time, but it's worth it.
Absolutely, and I always like to remind people that this is it's an easy game to get into in language learning, to compare yourself to other people and to compare yourself to others who have taken the challenge and see how well they've done and how poorly you've done. But ultimately, like in watching these videos, I'm very proud of the progress every single one of you has made. It's incredibly impressive, and you should be proud of that. And I'm sure you've seen other people's videos, but when we see other people's videos, we only see those snapshots, whereas we're aware of all of the slow days and the failures, the times when we embarrass ourselves in front of our teachers or whatever. So, you don't see that from other people. So always remember, other people are dealing with that too. And that's what makes this a challenge. And you've worked through that challenge and you've made that progress. And as you go forward, you should be very, very proud of the progress that you've made here.
Excellent. Well, thank you both. So the winner of our regular challenge is going to get $250 in italki credits, as well as a credit towards their next challenge. And our winner for advanced/polyglot is going to get 6 months of link, as well as admission to their next challenge. So without any further ado, our winner for advanced/polyglot is, Benny's giving me a little drum roll. Alicia, you are our winner for advanced/polyglot.
Wow, thank you. That was very unexpected.
All right, do you have anything that you'd like to say?
I'd just like to say thank you to both Sarah and Hazel, who are also in the advanced challenge with me. They were both so positive and helpful and spurring me on in my bad days and complimenting me when I did something great. It was a pleasure to be in the challenge with them, and also with Tom and Sophia and several other people in the regular challenge. So thank you.
Thank you. All right, and Benny, I need another drum roll. Our winner for the regular challenge is Sophia. Congrats, Sophia. All right, would you like to take the mic for a bit of an acceptance speech as well?
Sure. Oh, that makes me happy. Thank you. I am just really proud of the success that I made and stepping out of my comfort zone to do this. So I'm going to continue studying, and I'm very excited for the advanced challenge, and I'm excited to do it with Tom again. He was the best dream team study buddy. So we're going to push through and do great again. And yes, also thank you to Alicia and the rest of the community for inspiring me always and being so motivating, and to the polyglots and Benny for creating the challenge. It was a good time, a lot of fun.
Thank you. All right, so we're going to go ahead and wrap up. But before we do, I want to give Simon and Benny the chance to share where everyone can find them. So Simon, where can you be found?
Omniglot.com is my main website. I also have several blogs, a YouTube channel, it's Omniglot. I'm Omniglot on TikTok, and Yeathky on Instagram. That's IE. I'll put it in the chat.
IETHIGI, right?
That's right. It's
Yes.
a Welsh word. In someone who's keen on languages. Literally a languages dog.
All right, and Benny?
And of course, you can find me at Irish Polyglot on TikTok and Instagram and Twitter and everything. And of course, fluent3months.com for all your other language learning needs.
Excellent. And if you're watching this and you too would like to have a 15-minute conversation in your target language, you can find out more by visiting fluentin3months.com/challenge. So congratulations to our winners. Congratulations to all our finalists and participants for all of your amazing hard work. And until the next time, happy language learning.